One of the most iconic cars in history is, of course, the gull-wing DeLorean that brought Marty McFly from 1985 all the way back to 1955. But ironically, in 1985, the man behind the car was on trial for fraud charges after being on trial for drug trafficking charges after almost being the president of General Motors. Yes, this is a wild story that perhaps doesn't fit the moniker of Car Heroes, but does in many ways. This is the story of John DeLorean. I'm Jason Hassett. This is Car Heroes. Hey, so you might be wondering why for the entirety of this video there's a big yellow background that says current and combustion. Well, let me explain real quick and then we'll get back to the video, and you can skip this if you want because it's not really that important. It's just for some context for those of you who are wondering. Basically, I took a 4-year break from this channel, set up another channel where I did F1 news and F1 content, which got 17-something thousand subscribers, then started documentaries, and then started realizing that I missed doing automotive content. I tried publishing it on the rebranded version of the F1 channel. Turns out F1 people don't give a flying, well, you know, about automotive content in general, and I figured why not revive this channel. So the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 9 videos on this channel are going to be basically ones that were originally on that channel that then I cross-posted to here. So that kind of explains it. I guess that's all there is to say. Now let's jump back to the video.
You didn't listen. Can you repeat the question?
Hello everybody and welcome to Car Heroes, which maybe this week should be called Car Zeros given who we're talking about, but he did do some really cool things before doing a really dodgy, shady, stupid thing. And I'm of course talking about John DeLorean, the man who gave us the DMC DeLorean, which was made famous by going back to the future and then back to the future more and then back to the past before it went forward to the... Anyway, he built a car which was famous from the movie Back to the Future and famously stainless steel, but it was really cool. But I bet there's a lot to this story that you don't know about, and that's what we're going to jump into today. As always, in Car Heroes and Story Time, we're going to jump into all of the information which I've found on the interwebs, which is famously inaccurate. So if there's anything here that you find is either wrong, or if I've missed some facts you find interesting, please do pop it in the comments below. And while you're down there, why not smash that like button and hit that subscribe. But with all of that adieu, let's jump into the very fine life of John T. DeLorean. I don't know what his middle name is yet. Zachary. John Zachary DeLorean was born on January 6th, 1925 in Detroit, Michigan. He was the eldest of 4 brothers in a blue-collar immigrant family. His father, Zachary DeLorean, was a Romanian-born factory worker at Ford, and his mother, Catherine, was a Hungarian immigrant who worked for General Electric. The family struggled financially, and his parents' marriage was troubled. They divorced in 1942, leaving a young John to witness hardship from a very young age. But by the 1940s, John had become a bright student, attending Cass Technical High School in Detroit, an elite public school where he excelled in the electrical curriculum. His strong academic performances earned him a scholarship to the Lawrence Institute of Technology, which is now the Lawrence Technological University, where he studied industrial engineering. Unfortunately, DeLorean's studies, much like his early life, would be interrupted by hardship as the outbreak of World War II caused him to be drafted into the US Army, where he served for about 3 years. After an honorable discharge, he returns home to find his family in economic difficulty, prompting him to work briefly as a draftsman to support them before returning to college. DeLorean, though, finally does graduate in 1948 from Lawrence with a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering. Even at this early stage, he shows an independent streak, though. Instead of immediately pursuing his engineering career, he spends a short stint selling life insurance and manages to sell nearly $850,000 in policies within 10 months, which is a considerable sum now, but in the late 1940s is a massive amount of money. But he later quips that he took the job mainly to improve his communication skills. Finding insurance work unfulfilling despite financial success, he pivots back to the auto industry. And thus, by the early 1950s, he was seeking to further his education. DeLorean therefore enrolls in the Chrysler Institute of Engineering, a program that allows him to work at the Chrysler Corporation while taking graduate classes. He earns a master's degree in automotive engineering from Chrysler's Institute in 1952, and shortly after, he attains an MBA from the University of Michigan in 1956. He even briefly attends law school, demonstrating a broad ambition, though he did not complete the program. Fresh out of grad school, DeLorean lands a job at Packard Motor Company in 1953, starting on an impressive salary of $14,000 a year, a hefty sum at that time. Like, bearing in mind, a Rolls Royce of that era, I think, was $6,000. So just to give you an idea of how much $14,000 was. He quickly makes a mark by developing an improvement to Packard's Ultramatic transmission, devising a new torque converter and dual drive range that Packard markets as the Twin Ultramatic. DeLorean's knack for engineering innovation and attention to detail stands out at Packard. And by 1956, just 3 years into the job, the 31-year-old is promoted to head of research and development at Packard. However, these are tough times for independent car makers, and Packard merges with Studebaker in 1954 amid financial struggle. As Packard's future grows uncertain, DeLorean considers an offer from General Motors, who at the time is the giant of the industry. You know what John DeLorean could have used instead of a briefcase full of suspicious substances? Internet privacy. Because in a world full of wiretaps, sting operations, and corporate takedowns, you don't want someone worse than the feds, your ISP, watching and knowing what you're up to on all occasions. That's why I use NordVPN. It keeps your data secure, your location hidden, and your history, well, yours. Go to nordvpn.com/hassit right now to get a limited time 77% off a 2-year deal plus 4 months free, all with a 30-day money-back guarantee. It's the best protection online you'll find this side of 88 miles per hour. So check it out. Thank you to them. And now let's get back to the episode. In 1956, DeLorean accepts a position at General Motors, drawn by the opportunity to work in this giant arena. He joins GM's Pontiac division as an assistant to the chief engineer, Pete Estes, and general manager, Simone Bunky Knudsen. Pontiac at the time is a middling brand with an unclear identity, and GM's top brass kind of hope that DeLorean can reinvigorate it. Under Knudsen's mentorship, DeLorean flourishes. He proves to be an idea machine, earning dozens of patents for automotive innovations during his Pontiac years. DeLorean introduces technical and styling innovations at Pontiac that would become signature features. He pioneers the wide track design, widening the stance of Pontiac cars for better handling and a bold look, and develops a recessed windshield wiper that parks it out of sight, which is a sleek design touch that went on to be on basically every car going forward. At least nowadays, most cars, if not all cars, have that design. He has an intuitive sense of what emerging post-war car buyers want, cars that are not only reliable, but are also both stylish and powerful. In 1961, climbing the ranks, DeLorean is promoted to Pontiac's chief engineer at the age of only 36, while I am only the chief engineer of my own podcast at 36. Jesus Christ. It's not good. It's not good. He begins work on a car that would make automotive history. Sensing the market's craving for speed and excitement, he cooks up an idea to shoehorn a big block V8 engine into Pontiac's mid-sized Tempest body. The result, launched in 1964, is the Pontiac GTO, often cited as the first true muscle car. The high-performance model, nicknamed the GOAT by enthusiasts, becomes a runaway success and kicks off the 1960s muscle era. Pontiac sales surge and its image transforms from staid to sporty almost overnight. DeLorean receives abundant credit for conceiving the marketing of the GTO, which enthusiast magazines rave about. By 1965, as a reward for GTO's success, DeLorean, then just 40, is promoted to head of the Pontiac division overall, the youngest person to ever run a division of GM at that time. As Pontiac's chief, DeLorean continues to fill niche markets. He oversees the development of the Pontiac Firebird, debuting in 1967 as the stylish pony car to compete with the Ford Mustang, and the Pontiac Grand Prix, which was redesigned in 1969 as a personal luxury performance coupe. Both models are hits, further burnishing Pontiac's performance reputation. And by the end of the 1960s, Pontiac is the third best-selling brand in America, a remarkable climb largely attributed to DeLorean's leadership. Recognizing his success, GM's top management appoints DeLorean as general manager of Chevrolet in 1969, the company's flagship division and the highest car volume brand in the USA. It's a huge promotion, but also an enormous challenge. Chevrolet, by the end of the 1960s, is plagued by some massive quality problems and a recent downturn in sales. DeLorean moves to Chevrolet and immediately works on fixing these issues, including addressing problems with Chevrolet's Vega subcompact, which had suffered a notorious string of mechanical and reliability troubles. He brings a fresh management style to Chevy, cutting through bureaucracy to get plants running more efficiently. Throughout the 70s, DeLorean is massively successful at Chevrolet. He streamlines production and improves build quality, famously assigning extra inspectors to the Vega production line to ensure early models were as problem-free as possible. These efforts pay off. By 1971, Chevrolet's annual sales rebound to over 3 million cars. In fact, Chevy alone is selling nearly as many cars as the entire Ford Motor Company at this point, a statistic that underscores DeLorean's effective leadership, and one he was proud to point out, I might add. By 1972, John DeLorean has risen and has become the vice president of General Motors overall, put in charge of all car and truck production for the entire company. And many are talking about him becoming the future president of GM as a whole. During his GM career, John DeLorean gains a reputation not just for engineering and sales talent, but also as a brash nonconformist in the button-down world of Detroit executives. Unlike the typical conservative grey flannel auto executive, DeLorean cuts a flamboyant figure. He sported long sideburns, wore trendy lapel suits, and often kept his shirt collar open. More Hollywood than Motor City. He rubbed shoulders with celebrities and embraced a jet-setting lifestyle. He even invited Ford legend Lee Iacocca to be the best man at his second wedding in 1969, a bold choice given that Ford and GM were massively arch rivals. DeLorean was friends with movie stars and was often seen in the company of people like Johnny Carson and Sammy Davis Jr. I mean, he became something of a celebrity himself. And he also wasn't afraid of a little cosmetic enhancement. In the late 1960s, DeLorean underwent plastic surgery to sharpen his jawline, striving for a more chiseled leading man look. In April 1973, though, John DeLorean would do something which would shock industry insiders and the industry as a whole when he resigned from General Motors. Officially, DeLorean claimed he left to pursue socially responsible business opportunities and to do things the rigid corporate structure at GM wouldn't let him do. He told the press that the auto industry wasn't responding to public needs and that he wanted to build cars that make people's eyes light up, rather than bland machines sold via rebates. However, as is the case with everything DeLorean, controversy was bubbling up beneath the surface, as it was widely rumoured that DeLorean didn't leave entirely by his own choice. GM's top brass might have eased him out due to his non-conformity and discomfort his personal life caused among conservative executives. In fact, by the time of his departure, DeLorean's tabloid-esque lifestyle and third marriage to a model meant that he had become fodder among the newspapers and therefore clashed with GM's conservative image. And it was later reported that the idea of him becoming president was intolerable to the board of GM. After leaving GM, DeLorean briefly heads the National Alliance of Businessmen, which is just such a ridiculous name for any organization. Sounds like something that you'd hear on an episode of How I Met Your Mother, with Neil Patrick Harris, Barney Stinson-esque. This was a kind of mid-career pivot, but it isn't long before he gets the itch to create his own automobile company. And by late 1973, he's already kind of laying the groundwork for this new venture, one where he can build cars under his own name, free from GM's bureaucracy. Years later, DeLorean's break from GM and his candid memoir, On a Clear Day You Can See General Motors, published in 1979, would reveal his deep disagreements with this management. So later in 1973, he officially founds the DeLorean Motor Company, or DMC, and he envisions creating an ethical, innovative sports car, one that is sportier and more exciting than what GM would produce, but also safer and more durable. Over the next several years, DeLorean would raise an estimated $200 million to bankroll his new startup. Notably, he puts about $4 million of his own money in, demonstrating his personal commitment. The rest comes from a mix of eclectic investors, including Hollywood celebrities and well-heeled enthusiasts. It's an ambitious war chest for a new car company, but DeLorean's star power and track record obviously gather a massive amount of deep-pocketed support. DeLorean sets about designing his dream car, initially referred to as the DeLorean Safety Vehicle, or the DSV. He commissions Italian superstar designer Giorgetto Giugiaro to design this car's body. The design Giugiaro delivers is striking and futuristic, a sleek, low-slung two-seater sports car with a brushed stainless steel body and dramatic gull-wing doors that flip up like the wings of a bird. Underneath, DeLorean is determined to incorporate advanced safety features, and the car intends to be a rust-proof, long-lasting, and to have a superior crash safety structure. These ideals earn it the nickname of the ethical sports car, blending speed with social responsibility. In a move, though, that surprised many, DeLorean decides to build his manufacturing plant in the exotic location of Belfast in Northern Ireland. The fuck's he at now? In Darmurray, a suburb of Belfast, nonetheless. The late 1970s economy in Northern Ireland is troubled due to the ongoing sectarian conflict, and therefore the British government is eager to attract jobs in the region. They woo DeLorean with a generous incentive package, around £100 million in grants and loans to build the factory and create local employment. Construction of the DMC plant begins in 1978, managed by engineers from Renault. What were they thinking? No wonder it failed. Imagine like Americans going in and be like, so you guys can build this plant here. No, we can, yeah, no. We've got the French to do it, and they have a big backing. They have no problem building, factories here. Isn't that right? Yes, of course, we can build your crazy factory. It'll be no problem. You don't want any sort of security though, right? Safety, no problem, no? Yeah, sounds like the perfect cauldron of success. To turn Giugiaro's penned prototype into a production vehicle, DeLorean partners with Lotus Cars of England, and Lotus founder Colin Chapman and his team are contracted to do the engineering of the chassis. They take DeLorean's prototype and give it a backbone chassis and suspension layout somewhat derived from the Lotus Esprit. The engine chosen is a PRV V6 engine, a 2.5-litre fuel-injected V6 developed jointly by Peugeot, Renault and Volvo. Mounted behind the rear axle, this engine produces about 130 to 140 horsepower, sufficient for a conventional car, but for a sporty-looking machine, it's very much on the modest side. DeLorean, though, wanted to prioritize reliability and tried-and-true components, and the PRV was a very well-tested engine. But this choice would later draw criticism for lackluster performance, as you can imagine. In 1979, the car, which is officially designated the DMC-12 because the original target price was $12,000, is itching closer and closer to reality, though behind schedule. By 1979, the first prototypes are running and DeLorean begins publicity for the vehicle. Car magazines feature this stainless steel wonder and there's considerable curiosity. This will be the first new American car company in decades, but the DMC-12 has already failed its name, as its now reported launch price is closer to $25,000, more than double the initial goal and equivalent to luxury cars at this point. In fact, that was close to the top trim price of a Corvette at that time, and nearly $70,000 in today's money. As anticipation builds, DMC engages in some flashy marketing. For Christmas 1980, American Express catalog offers an ultra-exclusive special. 100 DeLorean cars plated in 24-karat gold, priced at $85,000. This glitzy promotion captures public imagination. The gold DeLorean is a symbol of 1980s excess, as you can imagine. Fewer than half a dozen gold DeLoreans were ever made, and sources commonly cite that only 2 or 3 of them were actually sold through the promotion. January 21st, 1981 marks a big occasion. Amid much fanfare, the first production DMC-12 rolls off the assembly line in Dunmurry in Northern Ireland. It's been a long road, nearly 8 years since DeLorean founded the company, but the moment of truth for his stainless steel sports car has arrived. Initial production ramps up slowly as workers adjust to build this entirely new car. And as you can imagine, the car's futuristic design made it a head-turner in 1981. The gull-wing doors, the stainless steel, and the Ital-design shape made it something out of science fiction. Early buyers found the DeLorean's appearance striking and unlike anything on the road. However, beneath its flashy looks, the DMC-12's performance did not live up to the expectations of a true sports car. Its Peugeot Renault Volvo V6 derived, as we mentioned before, roughly 130 horsepower, which coupled with the car's relatively hefty weight, resulted in a 0-60 time of around 10 seconds. Modest figures in the sports car world, and reviewers in 1981 noted that the DeLorean's handling and acceleration felt underwhelming, while its roughly $25,000 price tag was very overwhelming. Can you be overwhelmed? Yeah, you can, obviously. You just can't be whelmed, right? Yeah. Doesn't matter. In short, the car was undeniably cool looking, but it was nowhere near a Ferrari in terms of speed. In many ways, its mixed reviews show that it is the Cybertruck of its day. On the one hand, everyone agrees it's a conversation piece. But on the other hand, everyone is arguing about where it stands, what it means, and who the hell would want to buy it. Although, unfortunately, I am definitely the type of guy who would buy a Cybertruck and a DeLorean just because I'd be like, look how cool it looks. Because I am basically a grown man-child, as is every man. They won't admit it, but we all are, let's be honest. Unfortunately for DMC, the car is launched during a tough economic period. The United States is in a recession from 81 to 82, and the sports car market is soft. Interest rates are high and consumers are cautious. Even so, certain established sports cars are still selling well, notably the Corvette, partly because it had more horsepower and a loyal following. The DeLorean, though, a newcomer with unproven reliability, isn't met with this same fanfare. It doesn't have this same cushion. In February of 1982, after 1 year of production, the DeLorean Motor Company's situation looks dire. More than half of the nearly 7,000 DeLoreans built to date are unsold and still sitting on dealer lots. The company has burned through most of its cash, and John DeLorean himself is scrambling to find additional investors or loans to keep the company going. DMC is estimated to be $175 million in debt by early 1972. The government funds and investor money has been spent on the plant, parts, and operating expenses, but revenue from the cars itself just isn't coming to back this up. And at this stage, in February of 1982, only 1 year into production, its plant in Northern Ireland is placed into receivership. This effectively means that the British government has stepped in, because Northern Ireland is not the Republic of Ireland. For those of you who in my F1 videos call out British bias, I'm from Southern Ireland. Northern Ireland's covered by the British government. Slight aside there. Basically, they take control of the factory to protect its £100 million investment. And this is where things go very sideways for DeLorean. Around this time, investigators uncover some questionable financial maneuvers behind the scenes at DMC. In January of 1982, British authorities learned that approximately £23 million of government money provided in 1978 to 1979 had been quietly moved to a bank account in Panama under the name General Product Development Services. That account was meant ostensibly to be the fund for Lotus's engineering work, but Lotus never received those funds. The revelation sparked allegations that DeLorean himself had misappropriated company money, but it's a complex tangle. DeLorean insists the money was part of normal business dealings, but the timing and secrecy looks very suspect. An investigation is launched, but a twist occurs. Colin Chapman of Lotus dies in December of 1982, right as the scrutiny of this missing millions intensifies. Chapman's death fuels conspiracy theories and leaves many unanswered questions about where this money went, whether Chapman ever got it, and so on. Despite receivership, Belfast factory doesn't shut down immediately. The receivers allow a limited continuation of production into the spring of 1982, assembling cars and parts on hand in an effort to sell them off and pay creditors. Therefore, an additional 2,000 DeLorean cars are produced during this period, bringing the total amount of DeLorean cars ever built before the factory is closed to 9,000. John DeLorean remains hopeful that he can find a last-minute investor to kick production back off and get them out of this horrible position they're in. Rumors swirl of a possible deal with Saudi Arabia or an American conglomerate. But time is running out. By the summer of 1982, there's no rescue in sight, and DMC is on the brink of collapse. It later becomes public just how extravagantly John DeLorean was living, even as his company was failing, though. And at the height of the DMC crisis in 1982, John DeLorean himself owned a lavish 20-room duplex on Fifth Avenue in New York City, worth over $7 million, a 440-acre New Jersey estate, his residence with his wife, Christina Ferrere, valued at around $3.5 million, a ranch in California, complete with an 8-person hot tub, worth $4 million, and his personal net worth at the time was estimated to be around $28 million, thanks in part to earlier investments and possibly taking funds from DMC. This opulent lifestyle juxtaposed with DMC and caused a lot of questions to be asked. In an example of life's cruel irony, John DeLorean appeared in a national magazine advertisement for Cuddy Sark whiskey in 1981, just months before his company's collapse. The ad features DeLorean raising a glass with the caption, "One in every 100 businesses succeeds. Here's to those who take those odds." It's not great, is it? It's just not great. October 19th, though, of 1982 would cause the biggest stir in this whole thing. As if the financial troubles weren't enough, John DeLorean's world would come crashing down in a very public way. On this date, DeLorean is arrested by the FBI in Los Angeles and is charged with trafficking huge quantities of cocaine. In a sting operation that instantly makes headlines, undercover federal agents caught DeLorean on videotape agreeing to bankroll a drug deal. The plan was to sell 100 kilograms of cocaine worth about $24 million on the street, and using the profits to ostensibly bail out the DeLorean Motor Company. Video footage later released shows John DeLorean in a hotel near the airport of LAX, handing a suitcase full of cocaine and remarking, "It's better than gold," about the drug's value. The sensational image of an international auto executive handing over kilos of cocaine was obviously fodder for international tabloids. The arrest stemmed from a sting operation orchestrated by the FBI and DEA. A man named James Timothy Hoffman, who had been an FBI informant, played a key role. Hoffman was a former neighbor of DeLorean's in California, not a close friend, but like an acquaintance. And earlier in 1982, Hoffman, who himself had been awaiting trial on federal drug charges, alerted the FBI that John DeLorean might be interested in a cocaine deal. According to later court testimony, Hoffman approached DeLorean first, not the other way around, and dangled a proposition. Invest in a large cocaine shipment, make a huge profit, enough to solve DMC's money woes. Hoffman's motivation was suspect from the start. He had struck a deal with authorities, and it did look like entrapment to an extent. The timing of the arrest, though, coincided with the end of DeLorean's Motor Company. In late October of 1982, immediately following John DeLorean's arrest, DMC officially declares bankruptcy. The factory in Northern Ireland shuts down. The remaining unsold cars and parts are eventually auctioned off by creditors. For all purposes, DeLorean Motor Company ceases to exist at the end of 1982. John DeLorean vehemently proclaims his innocence in the drug deal, insisting he was coerced and that he only went along with the deal because he wanted to save the company under duress and to try and save his workforce and so on. He is released on bail and begins mounting a defense. The case becomes a media circus. The idea of a famous auto executive turned accused drug dealer is irresistible, as you can imagine, to the press at the time. And notably, entrapment emerges as the cornerstone of the defense from the outset. John DeLorean's trial on cocaine trafficking takes place in mid-1984 in a federal court in Los Angeles, and it is one of the most closely watched trials of that decade. The defense exposes the FBI's and the informant's tactics in great detail. Evidence is presented that Hoffman initiated contact with DeLorean and that DeLorean had no prior criminal record, whereas Hoffman was a convicted drug dealer and smuggler. And DeLorean's secretary, Carol Winkler, testifies for the defense. She produces call logs that Hoffman had made the first phone call reaching out to DeLorean, not vice versa. And this corroborates the entrapment narrative. So the trial continues, and on August 16th, 1984, it leads to a dramatic conclusion. The jury finds John DeLorean not guilty on all charges in the cocaine case. The verdict essentially agrees that the government entrapped him and that the jury believes that John DeLorean would not have become involved in drug trafficking if not for the FBI's scheme luring him into it. But by 1984, his business is gone. His reputation is irreparably tarnished. The media that had once celebrated him as a maverick now often portrayed him as the embodiment of corporate greed and fallibility. Outside the courthouse, DeLorean faces a throng of reporters and delivers the now infamous one-liner with a touch of bitter humor. "Would you buy a used car from me?" A quip that acknowledges how his credibility as a car salesman, or any type of salesman, has been destroyed once and for all. The legal troubles didn't end with the cocaine case, though. In 1985, US prosecutors indicted John DeLorean on a slew of fraud, racketeering, and tax evasion charges related to financing of the DeLorean Motor Company. The crux of these charges was that DeLorean had allegedly misused millions of dollars from investors' money, some of which had been hinted at already by British authorities, and the government claimed that he had diverted investment funds for personal use and deceived investors and so on. Another lengthy legal battle took place in 1986, and DeLorean was once again acquitted of all fraud and racketeering charges. The second courtroom victory was less publicized, but it cleared him of all criminal wrongdoing in the collapse of DMC. Despite the acquittal, this left John DeLorean financially depleted and ruined. He had spent a fortune on legal defenses in the 80s with no company or steady income, and his personal fortune was gone. So in the late 1980s, his marriage to Christina falls apart. He goes silent and away from the limelight, and they divorce in 1985 during the height of this turmoil. DeLorean, now in his 60s, keeps a low profile and avoids media for a time. He marries for a fourth time in 2002 to Sally Baldwin, who had met in the 1990s, and they have a daughter together. But John tries to live a more modest life in New Jersey. True to his nature as an engineer and dreamer, DeLorean can't quite let go of cars, though. And in the early 90s, he hints of a return to the auto industry. In 1994, he files a patent for a monorail transportation system. What you say? Monorail. What's that word? Monorail. Nothing concrete comes of this idea, but it shows that his inventive mind was still kind of ticking away. And he also floats a plan for a new sports car called the DMC2, but that also never really goes to plan. Family members later recall that John spent considerable time in his later years drafting tables, working on the next big thing. However, he never secures the capital to build another car. One of his last business ventures is decidedly more humble. He designs and sells a line of watches under the name DeLorean Time, using the internet to market them. He was hoping that they would kind of be built on his cachet, but they represent a far cry from this company. By 1999, he's forced to kind of declare personal bankruptcy, listing $85 million in debts against no significant assets. Over 40 different legal cases, lawsuits from investors, lenders, and so on had been filed against him since DMC's failures, and he had spent the intervening years fighting many of them. The bankruptcy marks the end of John DeLorean's high-flying finances, and as part of the bankruptcy, almost everything of value he still owns has to be sold. DeLorean's estate in Bedminster, New Jersey, at 434 acres of rolling country farmland where he had once planned to build a mansion, is sold off in 2000. The buyer is none other than Donald Trump, who converted into Trump National Golf Course in Bedminster. The Bedminster Golf Course was originally his. It's a poignant symbol in itself in many ways, like this grand property of a fallen auto titan becomes a luxury golf course for a future real estate mogul turned president. Even though DeLorean is no longer building cars, the DeLorean car itself, refuses to die. In the late 1990s, a Texas entrepreneur buys the rights to DeLorean Motor Company name and tries to reinvent it. And over the years, this happens a few times, but that was essentially it. In his final years, DeLorean's health declines. He reportedly becomes a born-again Christian in the aftermath of his entrapment case and finds solace in faith. And in March 19th, 2005, DeLorean dies at the age of 80 from a stroke, passing away in New Jersey. His tombstone in Troy, Michigan is engraved with an image of the DeLorean DMC-12, doors open in full gull-wing glory. Of course, this video couldn't be ended without discussing the pop culture reference that caused the DeLorean to have a cult following. Ironically, in the same year John DeLorean was fighting fraud charges, the DeLorean DMC-12 achieved eternal fame on the silver screen. In July of 1985, the blockbuster film Back to the Future was released, starring Michael J. Fox and co-starring a heavily modified DeLorean as the time machine that sends Marty McFly back to 1955. The movie was a smash hit, and suddenly the stainless steel sports car that had been a flop just a year earlier was immortalized as a cultural icon. The choice of the DeLorean in the film came with a wink to its quirks. Doc Brown noted that the cars required 88 miles an hour for time travel. The way I see it, if you're going to build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style? The image of the gull wing doors opening and the smoke and lights became one of cinema's most memorable moments, and John DeLorean was delighted by the twist of fate, later writing a personal letter to Back to the Future's writer and producer Bob Gay to thank him for using the car and turning it into a legend. Obviously, this would go on to be in more cars, and it made it an absolute collector's item over the years. So I don't really care to go into the revival attempts and so on. If you want me to, maybe comment below and we can look at them in detail in a future episode of Storytime, for example. But that has been John DeLorean. As always, I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please leave a like and maybe hit that subscribe while you're down there. If there's anything I've missed, of course, do comment. And I will see you next week for an episode of Storytime or Car Heroes. Who knows at this stage? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon.